Welcome, everyone. I'm Pam Sander. I'm the executive editor of the Star News and the Coastal Carolinas editor for Gatehouse Media. Thank you. Thank you. I will tell you up front, as some of my colleagues could tell you as well, I've had a bit of a freak-out moment over the last couple of days, maybe 7 of them, in fact. I've worried at some points that the Star News and WWAY and WHQR and other local media cared about this issue more than the community did. And I'm very thankful that you guys being out here tonight is telling me that we're right on target. I've been, oh, thank you, just in the nick of time. I've been allocated just a couple of minutes up here, and I would like to use that time to introduce you to the Star News' primary reporting team for this project's coverage. They're probably not going to like it because they're newspaper reporters and they don't really like their faces out there. But I'd start with Vaughn Haggerty, and if you're willing, if you would just wave, turn around and wave. Vaughn's down in the left corner. Vaughn's actually the one who broke this story on June 7th. And Adam Wagner is standing over there against the wall on his cell phone. He's our environmental issues reporter. Kevin Maurer is not here. I think he might be on the road somewhere, DC, from DC to here. I'm not really sure, but political reporter Tim Buckland. Gareth McGrath is the lead editor on this project. He might be behind stage somewhere, but Gareth has done an excellent job on this. Editors Julia March and Jim Ware, while not on the team proper, they've done all the heavy lifting for this event and pulled it off in less than a week. Sherry Jones, I only have a couple more. Sherry Jones is the Star News managing editor, and she corrals us every day, all day, to stay on the road and keep moving in the right direction. She also was the editor for this special section that was in the Star News today. We actually got 1,000 extra copies, and they're in the lobby, and we're going to be giving them out as you guys leave tonight. And then Mike Disselhorst, if you just wave, and he's the publisher of the Star News, and obviously he's the guy who enables us to keep doing this and keep devoting resources to it. So thank you to him. And also a thank you to WWAY and WHQR for partnering with this to make sure that we get it out there, whether people are watching it, listening to it, or reading it. So I give you Kevin Lizardo now from WWAY.
Thank you, Pam. Just want to say, something interesting happened a week or so ago. There were, in the Facebook groups that have formed, there were comments about the media's being told to stop covering this, and that one news outlet was going to stop covering it on Monday, and things like that the chemical companies were coming after us, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is the kind of story that we get into the business for, to serve our community and to interact with our community in a public service. So I want to allay your fears. I think I can speak for at least the 3 media outlets that are represented here tonight. We are not coming off this story. We will stay with it as long as we have to. In fact, every day we have editorial meetings at WWAY, and I have one question every day. When it gets to my turn, I say, what's our water story today? And that's what we are doing. That's our focus. I want to take a moment, first of all, thank everybody for coming out tonight. It shows how much you care about your community and how important this issue is. I also want to thank all the panelists who have come out today from here in Wilmington and other parts of the state and all over. Thank you very much. I also wanted to say quickly, we did extend an invitation to Comores. They decided they would not come. We also extended an invitation to the American Chemistry Council, which is a trade association that Comores is a member of, and they never responded. So for full disclosure, they were invited, industry representatives were invited, but chose not to come here tonight. So again, thank you to everybody, and thank you for everybody who's watching right now on wwaytv3.com or listening on WHQR. We think we probably have some pretty good audiences there as well. At this point, let's get started. I'll turn things over to Cy Cantwell from the Star News. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, Kevin. We're going to introduce ourselves first. I'm Cy Cantwell. I'm community editor of the Star News, and we thank you for coming at starnewsonline.com. Amanda?
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Fitzpatrick from WWAY News. We are excited, as my boss just said, to be here tonight. I'm also one of your moderators. And if you have someone, maybe a family member or friend who couldn't make it, we are live. So make sure they go to our website, wwaytv3.com, where they can see this entire event from 7 to 9 p.m. as we are live streaming.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vince Winkle. I'm with WHQR Public Radio here in Wilmington. I want to thank all these panelists for coming out tonight. It's quite a large group. And we are also broadcasting this live at 91.3. So there's a lot more people than just those in this room tonight involved in this forum. Thank you.
All right. Again, want to thank all of y'all for coming, and all of y'all who are listening out there through WWAY or through WHQR or from the Star News. We'd also like to thank our representatives from the offices of Congressman David Rouser and U.S. Senators Richard Burr and Tom Tillis, who are joining us this evening. We'd also like to thank our panelists for devoting time to answering some of the many questions surrounding this issue. They're going to be given brief but succinct and very good answers. We hope to keep tonight's forum fast-paced to answer as many questions as possible. Individual panelists will each spend about 5 minutes addressing 4 specific topics: what's being done, human impacts, legal and moral issues, and economic impacts. That's 4 of the panelists are going to speak. After that, the rest of the forum will be devoted to answering your questions. We thank the members of the public for submitted questions ahead of tonight's events. You can also write down your questions tonight on the forms that we've been distributing, and we will be collecting those forms. I understand you bring the questions down front. Does anybody, where's Julian? People will be walking up and down the aisles. There's Sherry Jones, managing editor, collecting questions. We may not get to those questions tonight, but the Star News will be following up on this. We're not going anywhere on this story, and we'll be looking for the answers to your questions in the days to come. I'm going to introduce the panelists now, and I'll ask you guys to kind of raise your hand when I call you out. Mike Brown is chairman of the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority Board. Dr. Philip Brown is New Hanover Regional Medical Center's chief physician executive. He oversees care quality, care transformation, and physician leadership. He is a vascular surgeon and former chief of the NHRMC medical staff. Kemp Burdett is the Cape Fear River Keeper and works to protect and improve water quality of the lower Cape Fear River. Larry Cahoon is a professor at UNCW. I got some Seahawk fans out there maybe. Water quality analysis is among his research interests. Natalie English is president and CEO of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce. Jim Fleckner is the executive director of the Cape Fear Public Utility Authority. Mike Giles is a coastal advocate with the North Carolina Coastal Federation. Stan Hartz is the director of environmental health and safety at UNCW, University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Sheila Holman is Assistant Secretary for Environment with the NC Department of Environmental Quality. Megan Hunter is a resident attorney with Fair Shake Environmental Legal Services of Akron, Ohio. Dr. Detlef Kanapi is a professor at NC State University, interested in drinking water quality and treatment, and was part of the team of researchers that evaluated the presence of GenX in the Cape Fear River. Bill Sappho has served as mayor of Wilmington since 2006. Philip Tart is the director of the New Hanover County's Health Department. Woody White is serving his second term on the New Hanover County Board of Commissioners, and he's chairman of that board. And Dr. Joseph Wild Ramsing is a senior researcher with the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations, based in Amsterdam, Netherlands. And I'm going to get right to the questions. These are questions that have been submitted to us. The first two-part question is directed to researcher Joseph Wild Ramsing with the Center for Research on Multinational Corporations. In West Virginia and Ohio, DuPont had to pay for clean water for the residents. In the Netherlands, you have pushed for Chemours to pay for bottled water to be brought in. Is there something we should be doing to make that happen here? And why do officials in other countries do more water testing than is required here?
It's definitely a complicated question. Thanks to the organizers for having me here tonight and to all of you for coming out. I think there's two issues to focus on for this initial question. One would be looking at why did it happen there? Why are the environmental authorities there acting with much more rigor than they have been here so far? And one is, I think, simply related to the amount of funding that's available for the authorities there, and the seriousness with which they go about and are able to do their jobs there in the Netherlands. The other is related to the remedy aspect, and what we've been doing is working with groups and with citizens there that have been impacted by this to really put pressure on the company, and we've been using some international legal instruments to put pressure on the company to actually provide for remedy, because under international law, in many cases you look at going beyond if there was strictly a legal liability. If there was strictly a legal responsibility, what you still see is that some basic principles, legal and moral principles about how corporations do business are codified in international law that can be used here as well as we've been able to use there. And some of these things are really basic principles that we all understand. Things like, if you're going to be putting something into a river and people are going to be drinking it, you should be telling them about that. Really basic things.
Thank you.
And so we've been able to use some pieces of international law to push for that, and indeed we've gained some concessions from the company in terms of providing drinking water to citizens who have been affected by that. Other things like the precautionary principle, where you just think of this idea of, if you're going to be putting something out there, you can't use the lack of scientific certainty about its impacts to justify not doing anything or not telling people about it. So.
Thank you. Try to hold your applause down. We want to get a lot of answers, a lot of information out tonight. And that, believe it or not, was just a kind of teaser of what's to come, because I forgot about the 5-minute speakers. So right now I want to introduce Woody White. He's chairman of the New Hanover County Board of Commissioners, and he's going to discuss what's being done. Woody?
Thank you, Sop. And I'm sure you all would much rather hear from the scientists and the doctors here, and we're going to get to them. But I do want to say a couple of words. I appreciate being offered the opportunity to let you guys know what's being done. And I want to look back over the last 22 days. 3 weeks ago tomorrow, most of us in this community heard the word GenX for the first time. It was the last day of school for nearly 27,200 public school students here. They were having parties in their classrooms, planning summer vacations. Thousands of people from all over the country were making their last plans to travel to the beaches and enjoy this community that we enjoy and love and live in every day. Now, initially, the first few minutes of reading about this, when I opened up my iPad and looked at it, my thoughts were probably just like yours. Wait a minute. This can't be right. How can a company be allowed to discharge an unregulated, emerging contaminant? I've now been told it is. The word contaminant should have been some indicator of the confusion we all now are suffering from. But how can a company discharge an emerging contaminant in our water supply? That doesn't sound right. Now, I see a lot of things every day in the courtroom that often defy comprehension. So my training as a lawyer kicked in, and like many of you, I started devouring information from the Star News, all the reporters that were mentioned here tonight, others, my own research from the state website that houses the permits from the EPA, everywhere. And the more I read, the more questions I had. Now, revelations made in the initial story and many follow-up stories since then have caused uncertainty, fear, and even panic in our community. Now, since then, with each passing day, we learn more. We now know more about the processes at the plant, about 100 miles from here. We also know there's a lack of sufficient health studies out there about what, if any, adverse health risk GenX poses in the amounts discharged. But with knowledge, we also are now in a better position to ask more informed questions and to make better, more informed demands of our state and federal regulators, but also demands of the Chemours Company. Now, personally, I've received dozens of emails and phone calls from people asking questions, wanting information. I have done and will continue to do my best to answer all of those questions that are flooding in. Most of these people, you folks here and others that are listening and contacting us, are doing the same research that I've been doing. I mean, it's the magic of Google, right? We're all experts in this over the last 22 days. I remember one lady sent me a brochure from 2010 that DuPont had prepared and probably used it as a sales conference touting GenX. It was a 3-page color document. I printed it off. I don't remember her name. She might be here tonight. But I made copies, and I took it in the meeting with Chemours when some of these folks were with us a couple of weeks ago. The things that we heard in there were inconsistent with the things that this brochure, published by DuPont in nice color photographs, said. We confronted the company about that. Another lady sent me an article about a class action suit over C8, the predecessor to GenX. Now, I had heard a little bit about it in some of the trade journals I read and information I keep up with in my daily vocation. And having handled groundwater contamination cases in my own law practice, the information in the article this lady sent about the decades-long fight with DuPont, West Virginia, and Ohio was very enlightening to me. Enlightening is putting it mildly. The more I read and learned, the less comfort I felt about getting accurate answers from the company. So here we are tonight, 22 days removed from the initial reporting. And what do we know and what is happening? Well, most, if not all, of the people seated to my left and right are better positioned than me to answer the questions about science and health. I see our role and our primary obligation as a county government, I believe, is to serve more as a focal point for gathering information for the public. Bill Sappho and Frank Williams from Brunswick County and George Brown from Pender share this. We all believe that we as government entities should be facilitators in getting the other entities of government higher up the food chain and academia together to share information with the public. That's why we're so thrilled about what the media has done here tonight and why we were so eager to participate in it. We have numerous laws in our books to keep our drinking water safe: the Clean Water Act, the North Carolina Water Act, even regulations on top of those laws. And I've been told, I hope this is true, that the water we drink today is safer than any point in our history in mankind. But that's not good enough. What we have learned over these last 3 weeks is that companies discharge emerging contaminants. Not just one or two, not just GenX or C8, many, hundreds, dozens, things that we don't even know and haven't even thought to look at, unless maybe Dr. Knappy has. Hopefully he will continue to do that. But they discharge them in waterways without real knowledge about health risks. And folks, this is unacceptable. It's an unacceptable policy. And I know those decisions are made higher up the chain of command, but they are hearing from this community about it. Now, as we sit here tonight, the discharge of GenX from the Fayetteville plant has stopped. Testing is being done, and results are being expedited and will soon be known. The DEQ, the EPA, the Department of Health and Human Services, and here locally, the CFPUA are all moving in the same direction on how we got here, where we go from here, and they're all working together. Specifically with the EPA, today I was sitting at my desk preparing for this tonight and reading and trying to learn more, and I got an unsolicited text from Congressman David Rouser. He said, "Woody, I want you to know what we're doing." He pointed out 2 specific things that he is personally involved with at EPA, and he's pushed them for, and EPA has now confirmed an investigation into the 2009 order that they claim gives them the legal authority to do what they've been doing. We'll see if that's the case. And they're also reviewing additional toxicity to see whether GenX has made its way into the water as a result of a vinyl producing process, or whether it was making it to sell and put in frying pans. And again, those are very detailed things, but those are the two different processes they explained to us as to why one's being discharged and the other isn't, or not very much. I appreciated that text. I appreciated what he's doing as our federal representative to look into it. And I commit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that our Board of County Commissioners, Commissioner Skip Watkins and Patricia Cusick and Jonathan Barfield and Rob Zappel, all of us are going to continue to do everything we can and not reduce any pressure as county government officials on this issue. And we're going to keep pushing for the reform that we know this community expects and deserves.
Thank you. Speaking on human impacts, Dr. Detlef Kanapi, professor at NC State University. Come on up here.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. I feel responsible for creating this mess in many ways, but I'm also, I'm very happy that you're all here, and that I'm very passionate about drinking water and the quality of drinking water, and it's amazing that the results that we generated in our lab have made an impact in terms of Kimura stopping their discharge. But I'm here right now to tell you a little bit about human impacts and perhaps the lack of knowledge of human impacts as they relate to fluorochemical. Let me see. Is this working? Okay. Oh, here we go. All right. Okay, so first of all, I've answered many emails over the last 3 weeks from residents in Wilmington and Brunswick County and Pender County, and I will continue to do so. So if you have questions that you want to direct to me, my email is listed right here. So, how did we get here, and why did we look at the chemicals that we found in the river? And the two most common studied fluorochemicals, I want to just show you what these structures look like, and this one here is C8 or PFOA, and this is a chemical that's used to make things like Teflon or Gore-Tex. So if you wear a Gore-Tex shoe or clothing, or if you have a Teflon pan, most likely PFOA was used in the process to make that polymer. And then it ends up as a waste product and was discharged partly into waterways. The other compound that's been studied for a long time is PFOS, perfluorooctane sulfonate, and this is commonly used in firefighting foams, and we see PFOS often occurring near firefighting training sites. And for many years, PFOS was also used as the main ingredient in Scotchgard. So I don't know how many of you use Scotchgard in your homes, but that was the main ingredient of Scotchgard. So PFOA and PFOS got a bad name over the last couple of years, and in fact, both chemicals were voluntarily phased out by manufacturers that make these compounds. And so we were curious what they're being replaced with. And along the way, with some digging, we came across this mysterious compound called GenX. And we also saw the same brochure that came out in 2010 that gave us some idea of what GenX was. And it's very similar in structure, but it has this one oxygen group here inserted into it. And so now we have a new chemical that's not been studied very much at all. There were some very basic animal tests that were done in the process of approving this chemical for manufacture, but there were no other really meaningful health data about this compound. And so this is a struggle that we're dealing with both in the drinking water field and as analytical chemists. Industry generates new chemicals very quickly at a very fast pace, and we know very little about those chemicals. Often they're proprietary, it's confidential business information, and so we become detectives to figure out what these chemicals are. You know, we did not know what these structures were, and it took quite a while to actually figure out what they were. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how these chemicals are released into the environment. So the one obvious pathway is the one that everybody's familiar with here, which is through fluorochemical manufacturers like Chemours and DuPont. But everybody uses fluorochemicals in their homes. And so in our wastewater, we often have also some fluorochemicals that we discharge. And so if you look at fluorochemicals in our lives, they're just about anywhere. So non-stick coatings, like the Teflon pan I mentioned earlier, if you go and get a fast food bite, there's a good chance that the fast food wrapper is a paper that's coated with fluorochemicals. And some of those fluorochemicals actually rub off into the food. Water repellent fabrics like Gore-Tex are fluorochemicals. And then, you know, everybody loves stain-resistant stuff in their homes. So anything that's stain-resistant, whether it's a carpet or your couch, or, you know, maybe this shirt may be laced with fluorochemicals. And so if we do a carpet cleaning or wash laundry, and these are you know, clothes with those chemicals added, then these compounds end up in the wastewater. Also, there are firefighting foams, so that's an interesting risk calculation. There's a very clear benefit in helping us fight fires, but we release in the process these fluorochemicals into water. So, you know, why do we care about these PFASs? And the one reason why we care about them at very low levels, you know, this is something that's been a topic of much discussion in the community. You know, how many drops of this in how many swimming pools of water? And, you know, that often serves to perhaps minimize potential risk. You know, there are chemicals out there that can be hazardous at these levels. And so one reason why we care about them at these very low levels is that they stick around in our body for a very long time. So for PFOA and PFOS, many, many years. So if 2 molecules of PFOS enter my body, 5 years later, one is still in my body. So that is why we care about them at very low levels, because if we continuously ingest them, they accumulate in our bodies, and that's the reason. So, you know, Scotchgard in the early 2000s was reformulated from PFOS to this PFBS. It's a 4-carbon compound rather than an 8-carbon compound, so it's a shorter chain compound, and it sticks less in our body, so the half-life is about 4 months. But we don't have any human data for GenX or for any of the other ethers that we discovered in the water. So it's impossible for me to say right now in terms of how fast we can eliminate these compounds from our body. Now, the way these compounds are approved by EPA is through animal testing, and what's very interesting with these animal tests is that the half-life in mice and rats for these compounds is very, very low. So that gives perhaps the false sense of security that some of these chemicals are safer than what they really are. And you can see that here for GenX, the half-life is a few days, and it's shorter than the other compounds. So I'll probably stop here. I wanted to maybe make one more point. What do we know about pre-FOA in terms of health risk? They are related to some forms of cancer and other health problems, and that came out through a separate study that was done in West Virginia and Ohio. And the reason why we care about GenX and the other ethers in the Wilmington water is that structurally these compounds are similar enough that there should be cause for concern. But that doesn't mean that we know what their impacts are on human health right now. So I will stop here, and I'm happy to answer more questions later.
Next, speaking for about 5 minutes on legal and moral issues is Megan Hunter, resident attorney with Fair Shake Environmental Legal Services. Megan?
Can I stay here? Is that fine?
Yeah, stay there.
Okay. All right, great.
We're trying to keep it moving.
So I am here because I grew up in Wilmington and was raised in Wilmington my whole life, but I work in Akron, Ohio now, representing individuals on all sorts of environmental problems. And we try to make that representation affordable because oftentimes that's the biggest hurdle is people being able to have access to environmental justice. And these laws don't matter if you can't access them. So I'm going to speak a little more generally because I am coming from Ohio and not North Carolina, despite growing up here. But I hope that what I say, it'll be clear what's useful for you. So I quickly wrote these remarks in the sake of time. So this is a forum on GenX, but I'd like to broaden the conversation to say really this must be a forum on drinking water sources. For most Wilmingtonians, that means a forum on the Cape Fear River. For those Wilmingtonians whose water comes from aquifers, the information in this forum should also be pertinent to how you're thinking about your own drinking water sources. There are facilities all along the Cape Fear River that discharge pollutants into our drinking water resource. This is the drinking water that goes into our babies' bottles, our children's sippy cups. It is the water we bathe them in, the water that makes the steam we tell them to inhale when they have a cold. It is the water that fills the baths we bathe in for comfort and the water that many of us drink. This is what the Cape Fear River is to us. The Cape Fear River is also a place where facilities discharge their wastewater. And it is a place where many people discharge their own wastewater through local wastewater treatment plants. As you know, there are laws designed to protect our water resources, and there are government agencies tasked with enforcing those laws. But the reality of what I see as an environmental attorney in my day-to-day work in Ohio is, one, people are often frustrated by the limited protection provided by the environmental laws currently in existence, or more accurately, they're often shocked and appalled by the limited nature of these protections. Two, people are often frustrated by the work or lack of work done by the agencies charged with enforcing these laws. People generally expect that agencies are doing a reasonable job of protecting our environmental and human health, and they are often shocked when they learn of the limited nature of an agency's actions with regard to a particular environmental health concern. Three, people are unsure of what they can do to affect change on these issues. We do need better laws to address environmental health. This is a political battle and something everyone can advocate for. We do need better enforcement of the laws that exist. Agencies fail to effectively protect against environmental harms, sometimes because they lack the resources to adequately identify and enforce against an environmental threat or harm. Agencies also sometimes fail to effectively protect against environmental harms because they have considerations other than environmental health that they weigh when making an ultimate decision. Agencies often have a great deal of discretion in enforcing some environmental protections. This can lead to political considerations, economic considerations, and other factors taking priority over environmental concerns. Again, this becomes a political battle where citizens can advocate to make sure the agencies tasked with enforcing their environmental laws have the resources they need to get that important work done, and also where the ultimate decision makers place environmental health first and foremost in their decision making. But outside of the political action required to better care for our environment, and in turn our health, we do have laws that citizens can use to defend their environment. and in turn to defend their health. And there are also opportunities for citizens to participate in environmental decision-making in their own communities to limit the environmental harms to which they're exposed. For example, every citizen should know about the Clean Water Act. This act's stated purpose is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. The Clean Water Act, broadly speaking, prohibits anyone, that means any business, any city, any individual, from discharging pollutants into a water of the United States through a point source, so a drain pipe, a ditch, any discrete source, without a permit. Each of those terms is broadly defined, which means that's a pretty powerful general prohibition. Where things get complicated is the without a permit part. The US EPA administers the Clean Water Act within a context of cooperative federalism. This means the US EPA can delegate its authority to administer the act to a state, which is the case in North Carolina. However, the US EPA always maintains its oversight authority. In the case of North Carolina, the state issues permits to facilities so they can discharge pollutants into waters of the United States. Before such a permit is issued, there's the opportunity for the public to comment on it. This is one way that you can be involved, that you can encourage others to be involved. The Clean Water Act also has a citizen suit provision. This is a powerful provision that allows an affected individual or a community group or business to step into the shoes of the regulator and enforce the law. Similar citizen suit provisions exist in most of the major environmental statutes, including the Safe Drinking Water Act. These provisions encourage citizens to be watchdogs. They encourage them to know how to look for problems and to help enforce when, for one reason or another, the government does not. Which brings us to the question of how to know what's wrong, what violations are taking place, whether someone has indeed broken the law. Luckily, we have laws that help with that too. The Federal Freedom of Information Act allows citizens to access a great deal of public records. States have their own public records laws that allow individuals to request public records. Remember, emails to and from public officials are public documents. Ask for them. Those emails often provide an enormous amount of information about actions taken by both regulators and industries that are regulated. The citizen supervision not only allows someone to enforce against a violator of the Clean Water Act, but it also allows someone to bring suit against the administrator of the Clean Water Act in the instance that they're failing to carry out their mandated duty. Depending on the facts at issue, this can sometimes be a way to get the US EPA to take actions required by law that have not been done for one reason or another. It's also important to remember that in circumstances where statutory law can't address the problems individuals and communities face, people may be able to pursue action under the common law to seek compensation for injuries they've sustained. It's a hard truth that the scales are often weighted against individuals and communities. Ideally, when an individual stands up at a community meeting and says something is wrong with my water, that person's concern should be given the same weight as when an industry expert submits an application and receives a permit to discharge a new potentially harmful chemical into a drinking water source. But right now, decision makers rely on what the credible scientists tell them, which becomes highly problematic when a community or individual doesn't have the resources to build the scientific evidence necessary to address their concerns. What I hope to emphasize to you today is that as individuals and communities, we do have tools and resources to use to defend our environment. We do not have to take regulators or regulated industries at their words, but we can use the tools available to us to get the information we need to ensure that we are safe and that our environment is healthy. But this requires being determined, being resourceful, and being persistent. Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking on economic impacts, Natalie English, President and CEO of the Wilmington Chamber of Commerce, and then we'll get back to the questions.
Thank you. So water quality and water availability are critical components to a successful economy. I don't think that anyone questions that. It's an even more acute issue in our community because of how dependent we are on two bodies of water, the Atlantic Ocean and the Cape Fear River. The Atlantic Ocean provides a destination for tourism, for an impact to our economy that is great. The Cape Fear River not only provides that tourist destination that's a great impact to our economy, but also it's a source of water for industry and a source of water for us to all drink. I think as we continue to consider what impacts across the board any of these chemical compounds might have on ourselves, our individual selves, as well as our economy, It's important to wait, but to be diligent in expecting answers until those scientists, those regulators have done their work. We believe that, that's the critical component before we determine how we move forward. The economic impacts are completely unknown, and I wish I could tell you that I absolutely know what this might mean. But until we get data back from our regulators at the state and federal level and have a true understanding for what this chemical compound means to all of us, I can't tell you that. I can tell you that tourists are still coming. I can tell you if you live here, you're going to be frustrated next week. There's going to be a lot of traffic. And I can tell you that people are still going to work every day. I can tell you that no business has decided to leave. And I can tell you to date that no business has decided not to come here. I have to tell you that they've decided to wait and see. But I can't tell you that they've decided not to come here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.